Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspective, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on local government, and our guest is former Campbell mayor and current supervisorial candidate, Jason Baker. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So Jason, our viewers are often interested in understanding, learning from city leaders and community leaders, how they came to be in community life. And so, where did you grow up and what experience did you have in growing up that kind of brought you to public service and community life?
Yeah. Well, I grew up, I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and actually a small mining town outside of there called Copperton. Mm-hmm. I grew up pretty modest means. When I was a kid growing up, I was on free and reduced lunch. I grew up on some welfare for a while. And so that really helped shape my life since then. It's really been about public service, about trying to help one another and work for good government. And ever since then, from being a firefighter to a public health researcher to a public interest lawyer to a mayor, it's been all about trying to make the world better for all of us.
I see. How long did you live in Utah? Did you live through childhood there?
I lived in Utah till I did third grade in upstate New York. But then I would go back and visit my dad for summers in Utah. So Utah is definitely a formative place, and part of the reason I care about the environment a lot, because they have great things in Utah.
I see. What brought you to New York?
My parents, my mom and stepdad, both were getting their degrees. They're PhDs in English, so they're English professors and are still to this day. So they were getting degrees they got their masters in Utah and PhDs in New York, and then wanted to go somewhere where it was sunny. So they went to California.
I see. So after New York, they wanted more sunshine.
That's right.
What age were you about when you were living in New York? It was what was the campus life
So,
like?
It's funny. The smell of used bookstores and campus libraries still reminds me of home, because I really grew up on a campus, learning, going to poetry readings and learning about, libraries. And it's part of the reason I love libraries and learning today. I got my start in politics working on a library bond measure in Campbell.
I see. Yes. And at what age did you move out to California?
I did 8th grade in California. I did middle school and then high school in Fresno. Fabulous. Yeah.
Interesting. Good. What brought you to being a life as a firefighter? Where were you a firefighter, and how long ago was that?
Yeah, there's a goofy picture on my website if you want of me with fire and a big beard, because I didn't shave the whole season. I was a forest firefighter. I see. So I would get called. I had a pager on my side, and we would have to, and that's when there were pagers. And there was, they would go off, and we'd have to be on the bus with all our stuff in 2 hours. Wow. And they would drive us up to Northern California, to Chico, a lot of times, and we get based out of there and go into wildfires, sometimes on helicopters without doors. Wow. It was exciting, and part of the reason I did it was because I knew that later on I wanted to maybe have a career in law and politics, and sort of move paper from one side of the desk to the other. And I thought it was important to know sort of what it's like to dig ditches and swing an axe and do real hard work, and that informs my work every day when I'm doing public policy.
Now the beard, we'll come back to that, because it's an interesting choice. It's an interesting choice for a firefighting job. I would always be worried about my beard catching on fire, but out in the woods, that's a different story. Were you like living in the woods waiting for this call, or were you down in Fresno? Or
no, this was a college. I was at UC Davis, and so it was a job I had in college, and it made some good money too. And I was out in the forest almost the entire time, so I didn't have a lot of places to spend the money. So it was a nice way to have a paycheck and not do the usual thing when you're a kid and spend it all on movies and everything else.
Yes, I had that experience in the Navy and paid almost nothing, but if you're away from places where you can spend money, it accumulates a little bit at least.
Right, so, exactly. Good. That was it.
What did you study in school?
Political science, and then I had enough units for history and English minors, but I never filed for them. But I've always liked policy and politics and the way government can help us do better together.
I see. And for the history and English, were you taking extra classes out of interest, or really? Okay.
Yeah, I love history. I talked my way into some upper division history classes that I wasn't technically allowed to be in, because I really enjoyed studying history, and I think you can learn from it, and it's just fascinating.
Were there other students at Davis at the time? It was Davis, right?
Yeah.
Were there other students who were doing the firefighter thing? How did you get involved with that?
Yeah, the U.S. Forest Service advertises on campus and says, hey, if you want this job, and a few students. I think there was a 15-person crew, I think, out of UC Davis, and we had a reputation for being a good college crew. So we got to do a lot of times be in with the hot shots, who are the first in and the really tough guys and women, and the last out
I see.
It was good.
It's an interesting thing. They must need a lot of manpower for that, or people power, because I know that tragically they lost some inmates who were working in forest fighting. Was that part of the same service, or an auxiliary to that?
Yeah, we called them con crews. I don't know if that's nice or not, but they were inmate crews worked as hard as any other crew I've seen. They worked really hard because they were happy to be out there.
Yeah.
It was a terrific way to get people who were serving time, get them out in the open. I felt totally safe around them, and I felt they were really effective crews. I was glad they were there.
But it's a dangerous work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did people appreciate that, or did you feel well trained to handle the danger?
I did feel well trained, and a lot of times our crew chief was a smoke jumper, taking time off, like relaxing from being a smoke jumper to come help out some crews. I don't know that.
What's a smoke jumper?
So smoke jumper are the men and women who get on a plane and parachute into a fire with all their equipment, and try to cut line in ways that are inaccessible to anything else. It's amazing work. It's incredibly dangerous and difficult.
Wow.
I don't know that I appreciated the danger as much until I was out on a fire, and there was I was in California, and there was a Storm King mountain fire in Colorado where some smoke jumpers actually died. They got burned over, and they announced this over the loudspeaker at my camp. And so we were hearing, it's almost like the MASH, the old school.
Right.
We're hearing this, and you're thinking, yeah, those folks who are way better at this than I am and way better prepared and trained had an incident. It could happen.
Right, and it's good that you were sensitive to that. Did you do that for the time you were in college and then moved on to other work after?
I like to say I didn't do it very long, and I wasn't very good about it.
Yes.
Good at it, but it taught me a lot. My best job at it was to feed the big guys my sandwiches.
Right.
Because we would always get one turkey and one ham. I don't know if that's how they do it in the Navy.
Right.
And I wasn't big enough to need 2 sandwiches, so I give the workhorses.
One could burn a lot of calories fighting a fire. I burn a lot of calories worrying about it. So,
that's right.
Good. And so after school, where did you end up? Did you come to the Bay Area at that point, or was it later?
Yeah, so no, right after, I tricked you, that's not true. I spent 2 years in between undergraduate school and law school. I stayed in Davis, so I did 5 years at Davis undergrad, and then 2 more years I lived in Davis, and I worked in Sacramento for the UC Davis Medical Center doing gun violence health policy research. Essentially, we studied gun violence like a disease.
Wow. I thought it was illegal to do that because of Republican administration policies.
That's how I lost my first job. The first and only job I've ever sort of lost and been fired from. It was because the Republicans cut funding for studying gun violence from a health policy perspective.
Wow, how interesting.
I was an actual casualty of that, and I'm glad that just recently we started getting some of that back because one of our best weapons in a lot of these fights is data, is information.
Right.
And at that agency, I worked for an ER doctor who also was a public health professional, MD, MPH, who just got tired of seeing kids shot in his ER, and so said, you know what, I'm gonna study this and say, okay, if you encounter a gun, what does that do for your outcomes in terms of criminal history and everything else? And amazing work. His name's Garen Wintemute, and he, when they cut his funding, he spent $1 million of his own money to keep that health research going.
Wow.
He wasn't rich; he was just a doctor, but didn't have a lot of expenses, and he did it because he believed in trying to keep us safer.
It's very interesting and troubling aspect of sort of the current political environment that there's the denial of climate science and a desire to not have factual information be developed so that it can be used to attain sensible policy. So I hope you'll hold that against the Republicans in your public life.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's if libraries and education are our best tools and foundations of democracy, I think sort of the opposite of that is suppressing information and having false facts out there, taking off information off the EPA webpage.
Right.
It's just pernicious and evil.
Yeah, it's shocking, and it's beyond that. They're apparently screening communications and screening proposals to eliminate these things that would develop the factual information. So I think it's quite shocking.
Yeah.
So
and wrong.
Exactly. So in your work as a councilman, we'll talk more about that. But I'm just curious if your experience in firefighting and if your experience with gun violence ever sort of informed policy debate that you participated in. Did those things come before you?
Yeah, I think when people get nervous about pensions for first responders, having been there, I mean, I was on a fire once where we lit a backfire the night before, intentionally burned down some trees to make an area that was not burnable for the big fire. And the next day, the big fire burned over our helipad where we'd helicoptered into, burned over our path back up to that helipad, so we had to go somewhere else. And if we hadn't built that backfire, we wouldn't have made it out. Like that was our only escape route, was the still smoldering area that we'd burnt the night before.
Right.
And it was a split-second decision. And that's the moment, you're a firefighter looking at your shake and bake. We had these things that are like essentially high-tech aluminum foil that you put over yourself.
Your last chance.
Yeah, and
shelter.
It's not a good day if you're even looking at that. And I was there, and so when people start saying, well, these firefighters are getting paid, too much, or their pensions are too big, or there shouldn't be, four people on engines. I wasn't a shelter fire person. I wouldn't do it, but it is a very cogent reminder of how much our first responders put on the line. And it also helped me want to do some of the things I did. I was on the interoperability authority in our county, which helped get radios so that throughout the county, firefighters and police can talk to one another on the same radio system.
Right. That's fabulous. Remember, that was one of the big problems that were identified in the 9/11 response. So many different agencies responded and they couldn't coordinate directly.
Yeah. Not a lot of people know that, but that's right. That was it was out of the 9/11 Commission came a recommendation, because you had all these agencies responding to 9/11, and they couldn't communicate well, and communication is so important in an incident like that.
Right.
And same thing with the Boston bombing situation, where you had Boston police, you had MIT police because it went under the campus,
right.
and then you had small town police, and all of them responding and trying to communicate, and they were able to because they had a system like this. And now in Santa Clara County, in part because of the work I did, I chaired that for 2 years, and I was a founding member of the board. I was on the first one. We have that system up in place in most of the county. It should be in all of it soon.
Good.
And our first test was Super Bowl 50, and it ran with flying colors, and we were safer because of it.
Right, wonderful, fabulous. So you finally did come to the Bay Area after the job at the Davis Medical Center.
Yeah, so then I went to a law school at Santa Clara Law.
Oh, wonderful.
I met my wife there the first day. It took me a year and a half to talk her into dating me, but I did. And I got a great education from Santa Clara with a public interest bent. And it's one of the things I love about Santa Clara, run by Jesuits, and they really believe in giving back and community service.
I see. And what do you mean by that? A public service bent in terms of the focus of your law classes and the skills you were developing?
To an extent. I mean, to some extent, law classes are similar because they got to teach you sort of the basics, and they kind of teach you to think like a lawyer, is what they say.
So it's kind of a skill, and it's how you use it that's important.
Well, and they have the Ethics Center on campus, the Markle Ethics Center there, and they had programs there. They had the Catherine and George Alexander Law Center, and I volunteered for that and was able to provide legal advice for free for people who couldn't afford it. Some of the advice we provided was bankruptcy advice. I remember to this day, people would come in and say, look, I've got all these bills, I'd like to declare bankruptcy, can you help me? And these people were poor enough they couldn't afford a bankruptcy lawyer.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, what caused their bankruptcy was health care. And so we'd have to tell those people, look, if you've got health problems, don't declare bankruptcy, because you're just going to be back in the same hole again.
Right.
So just ignore the creditors. Here's a letter saying I'm uncollectible, and wait until hopefully your health problems get better.
Oh, interesting.
Our health policy has progressed since then. Things are a little better, going the wrong direction these days. But
right. Hopefully not too far.
Yeah, but that's part of what the Santa Clara education offers, is the ability to give back.
Fabulous. That's nice. And it's great that you had that experience in working with people in need and using law as a tool. Has that emerged in other aspects of your life or your professional life as a lawyer? Yeah.
So I've dedicated my professional life to trying to help others, especially those who don't ordinarily have a voice. So among the work I got to do at the Catherine and George Alexander Law Center was a little bit of class action consumer protection work.
Wow.
I got to help people who were being defrauded based on car purchases and other kinds of things.
Yeah.
And that helped me get a job. That, and also I interned at the Special Litigation Division in the City and County of San Francisco, suing gun manufacturers on behalf of San Francisco and also the county. So I helped represent the county a long time ago, and I am well aware that they can do good work.
Fabulous. Well, it's great to get that background on you, Jason. We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back and talk about your more of your public life.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. We're back with former Campbell Mayor and current supervisorial candidate Jason Baker. Jason, thanks for being with us, and thanks for the information you shared with us in the first part of our show. In this segment, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about your experience as a council member and mayor in Campbell. How did you come to decide to run? What brought you to that?
You know, I think I've always wanted to do public service, even from when I was a kid. And then there was an opening on the Campbell Council. My son was, I think, 4 months old when I first ran.
Wow.
So I was, it was not easy, but I was knocking on doors with a stroller and saying hello, and I'm running for council.
Right. Did you ever knock on doors with one of those baby Bjorn things, the baby strapped to you?
You know, I didn't, because my son had a little spitting up issue, and so we couldn't use baby Bjorn.
That would be a mess. Okay.
Yeah, we learned real quick what that baby Bjorns didn't work. But I did have a stroller, and it helped me get my message across to people that I really do. And part of the reason I do it is for the kids.
Well, in seriousness, it's hard to do focus on anything when you have a new baby. And I wonder, was there something very compelling going on that got you interested and made you feel like that was the time to do it despite having a young one?
Well, you know, I had just finished working on that library ballot measure I mentioned earlier. So it was to try to pass a bond measure to keep library funding throughout the county, even in pretty tough economic times.
Right.
And I think then, maybe especially then, libraries are so important for people to be able to get a free source of education. So I'd kind of gotten to know some of the folks. I'd served on the Campbell Civic Improvement Commission for 3 years, working on public art and parks and libraries.
Right.
And it really kind of got me excited about the hope and promise of good government.
Yes, Campbell has nice civic facilities. They have nice public buildings and spaces.
Thank you.
Yes.
I worked hard for it.
Good.
When I was mayor, we spent $3 million, agreed to spend $3 million investing in parks.
Wow.
We put in a new park during the recession, which was not an easy thing to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that that's part of the reason Campbell is so beloved, even countywide, is because our community center, our parks are top notch.
Right, lovely. And the library bond, did that work out? Did it pass?
It did, and then as vice chair and then chair of the library board, I worked on the next one 10 years later.
Oh, okay.
And that passed too.
Fabulous.
And Campbell both times voted the highest in the county, I think, to pass that measure, because we really value education in libraries.
Yes, well, I appreciate that work. I know that as Democrats, we always, one of the things that can make us feel good is to go to a public library or a school and see kids learning and enjoying books, and so it's important work.
Yeah.
So, what issues came before you in the council in Campbell? What were memorable occurrences? What things are you proud of?
Yeah, a lot. So I was on Campbell Council for 8 years, and I was mayor twice, and we did a lot of work. I think the work I'm most proud of was some of my regional work. I was on the Valley Transportation Authority and also the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is a 9-county transportation body. You know, to give you a sense of scale, my first vote on that board on MTC was $900 million for train cars for San Francisco.
Wow. My
second vote the same day was to put the lights back up on the Bay Bridge, which I'm pretty proud of.
Wow.
I'm a big fan of public art. So I think my work on transportation has been, I've been proud of. It's been, because everybody has to get somewhere. You know, VTA and MTC, they deal with, you know, walking, biking, trains, buses, everything, and it crosses socioeconomic groups and everything else.
What are the sort of housing and transportation issues that particularly affected Campbell, and what were the involvements? How did that connect to that regional work?
Yeah. So I think that you're right to say housing and transportation, because they're inextricably linked. The affordable housing is an issue throughout the county, throughout the region, and throughout the state. And I always say, like, affordable housing is not just about helping people who can't afford a house being nice. It's about our survival as a region. It's about us continuing to be Silicon Valley and having that drive, because there are other regions in the country and in the world who want to be us. Denver and Seattle and other places. And one of the ways they compete against us and try to beat us out is because of affordable housing and traffic. So I worked hard on those, and I think I put my money where my mouth was. We put 4- and 5-story condos, a 4-story and a 5-story condos and apartments in downtown Campbell, 75 feet from light rail. And you know, that's not easy to get done in Campbell. You can't get elected in Campbell unless you write small town feel. And I believe in the small town feel in Campbell. I just think that the way you protect those single family homes is put density where it belongs, in downtown, next to light rail, where people can walk and bike to the prune yard and to downtown, and that helps us with traffic, that helps us with parking, helps us with greenhouse gases, and it helps protect those other neighborhoods and keeps Campbell feeling Campbell.
So in Campbell in particular, because this dynamic plays out so much throughout the area, and I'm very interested in your perspective from the regional planning point of view, but developments of 4 stories or 5 stories usually turn out some opposition. Did you have organized opposition to those projects in Campbell?
I did, and there was people who were nervous and who will be continued to be nervous. But I think that they understood, and I had this discussion one-on-one with some of my earliest backers, people on the Historic Preservation Board who were nervous about that kind of density. But I think we were able to come to an agreement at the end of the day that we've got that light rail station there. It's right next to light rail. It will help all the other things that I talked about. And also, we did get a lot of affordable housing. And I think that everybody understands we need more affordable housing, because the way that, and part of the way you get that is both building a little bit of density where it makes sense, and also by giving the developers that density, you can get some affordable housing concessions in return. And so those developments have some affordable housing, so folks will be able to live close to downtown. If we don't do it, the way we're planning now is just really anti-family. My wife and I got into a house, we can live there, but grandparents can't live here sometimes. Grandkids won't be able to live here.
Oh, our own kids.
Yeah. And it doesn't make sense. We've got to do better, and I try to do some of that both on Campbell Council and also regionally.
Interesting. The one argument you often hear, and I wonder if you heard this in relation to these or other projects in Campbell, is the idea that well, it's the NIMBY attitude. It's like I believe and understand the theory of high density housing by rail, but I don't really want it by me. It's not suitable in my community because of the character and nature of my community, and or that it's more suitable in San Jose or in open spaces in other parts of the county. Did you hear those arguments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we do have a housing crisis, and we need to treat it like a crisis, not just say it's a crisis, but treat it like a crisis. And I think the more people do understand this hits home, and we really could lose the good thing we have if people can't afford to live here. But also I think there's a time and a place for making sure that housing goes in the right places. So I think, one of the things I worked on as president of the Cities Association, which is our group of mostly mayors, it's 15, each city gets 1 vote, and we meet at 7 to 9 at night and Thursday nights and try to deal with regional problems.
What regional area does that group cover?
So it's the whole county. It's every city gets 1 vote, and mostly it's the mayors that appoint themselves. I was on that for a number of years until I got to be president of the body. And when I made what's called a regional housing needs assessment sub-region one of our priorities, and that's that idea is still continuing. I hope we can get there, and that's a means of saying, okay, if there are some communities where density like that really doesn't make sense, Los Gatos, building high density up in the hills just really doesn't make sense. Montessorino, doesn't have any commercial. Then those communities can dedicate some of their transportation dollars, for instance, some resources to San Jose or Milpitas that do have a lot more capacity for density, and sort of make a market. So you say, look, you can't just say no to density and not have to give some resources in exchange. Right. But as a region, we can make those decisions rather than forcing density on some of the smaller cities where it might make less sense for everybody.
Did you ever wish there were a regional czar who could just dictate that you have to take this many units and you have to take this many units?
Well, there is. The state says, it gives you those regional housing needs assessment numbers and says that the cities must plan for those, for a certain number of affordable units and very low, to try to get cities to do that kind of thing. Cities are better or worse about living up to those numbers. Campbell did a pretty good job. I think that the issue is that the regional czar would have to know these communities, and I think that's part of the argument for doing it on a regional basis, is because we can all sit around a table, and we have, and talk about, look, I think density is important, I think affordable housing is important, but I don't think that Los Gatos is in the same situation as San Jose or Milpitas. Right. So let's find ways to pool our resources in terms of transportation dollars, and put density, definitely put density in our region, but put it where it belongs.
It sounds like you're in favor of the model that retains local control over decisions, but maybe with mechanisms, effective mechanisms for communities to coordinate to attain some kind of regional goal or obligation.
I think that's right. Yeah. I think that makes sense, because I think you will lose a lot of people if you start just trying to, and you can make the wrong decisions by accident if you don't know the communities as well as their mayors. And part of the reason I'm endorsed by most of the mayors and vice mayors in the county for this race is I have been able to make those regional agreements. People have seen my work and they know that I care about the communities in our county.
I see. And turning to your race, your current race for supervisor. It's, yes.
I'm running for supervisor.
Exactly. And you're running for supervisor in District 4. Which communities are within District 4?
So that's Ken Yeager's seat. He's termed out. I'm not foolish enough to run against him. I think he's done a terrific job, and we'll have big shoes to fill, whoever gets the job. So it's parts of San Jose. Essentially, Campbell's right in the middle, and then you have 3 districts in San Jose, and then Santa Clara.
I see.
Yeah.
Good.
So.
And what motivates you to run for supervisor?
You know, I love the work. I've served on county boards and commissions, and regionally beyond our county boards and commissions, and I've served with every sitting supervisor there is. I have more regional experience than any of the candidates running, and I want to keep doing that. The regional stage is very interesting. It matters, and really, at the end of the day, I mean, I'll tell you an anecdote that maybe answers the question better. As my kids get older, it was actually easier when they were babies because they don't understand what's kind of going on. But when my son
what was easier? It was easier being involved in politics.
Going to the nighttime meetings
I see.
missing jammy time, which is hard. It's a downside to the job because especially as I did it, I put my all into it because I love the work. I believe it matters to people. But as my son got older, he started, he'd see me put a tie on at night and said, why are you going to a meeting? And he's like, I know what that means. In fact, we would read Harry Potter to our kids at night, but not unless we were both there, my wife and I. And so it would mean missing out on Harry Potter, which is tough, right? That's tough for a dad. But one of the nights he asked me, why are you going to a meeting? Why are you putting a tie on? I said, we were going to ban plastic bags that night. And I was able to say, you know what? You know why I'm doing it? It's because we're actually going to make the world a little bit better for you and for us. We're going to make the creeks cleaner, and data just came out that said we did, at least in San Francisco.
Yeah.
We're literally going to make the world a little bit better for you and for your future. And so that's why I'm going. And I don't want to miss jammy time, but this work is important for you and for us and for the world. So that's why I'm doing it.
What do you think the big challenges will be if you get the position? What are the hard things to do?
A lot of it's hard. I mean, the county, not a lot of folks know how much the county does, how broad it is. It's $6.5 billion, give or take, annual budget. Plus, we just voted for $7.5 billion in taxes, $6.5 for transportation, and I was an early and key leader on that transportation measure, and also another almost $1 billion for homeless and affordable housing. One of the challenges, and one of the reasons I want this job and think I would be good at it, is we need to make sure that money is spent well. Because we Democrats believe that there can be good government. Government can do good things like help solve homelessness, and we might get there. Help solve our transportation and traffic problems. Because if you're in traffic, it's just stealing time out of your life that you aren't spending at the job you hopefully love or with your kids. It's a serious issue.
Right.
We got to make sure that money is spent effectively, carefully, and well. And I think that'd be one of the challenges.
If a viewer were inspired by your responses to my insightful questions, your insightful responses to my questions, how would they reach out to your campaign? How would they reach you?
My website's pretty easy. It's www.jasonbaker.vote, and the email is jason@jasonbaker.vote. And they can call me on a phone that rolls over to my cell phone, which is 408-426-8667. I hope folks will get involved. I've got a bunch of Santa Clara interns helping me out, smart, great people, and the campaign's going strong.
Wonderful. Good. Well, thank you for all the information and insights you've shared with us today, Jason. It was nice to get to know you and to share some of your background and your experience and inspiration with our viewers. Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We'll see you on the campaign trail.